are you willing to take the risk? We came up with this concept of what we called cyber archaeology. Really, language is the heart of cultures. We're not just about digitization. We're actually about digital transformation.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا متابعينا الكرام في حلقة جديدة لفيس بودكاست. مثل الحلقة الماضية، حلقتنا اليوم حتكون باللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن حيكون في السبتايتلز متواجدة أسفل الشاشة. ضيفنا اليوم هو الدكتور نيل سميث، أحد مؤسسي الشركة، وهو متخصص في علم الحاسبات، الآثار والتراث الثقافي، وهو أيضا مدير مشارك في مركز علم الآثار السيبراني والاستدامة في جامعة كاليفورنيا بمدينة سان دييغو. نتمنى لكم مشاهدة ممتعة. Welcome back to this podcast. Today's guest will be one of our co-founders, Dr. Neil Smith. Welcome, Dr. Neil. It's nice to have you.
It's a pleasure, always.
Nice. So, as always with all of our guests, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself, your academic career, your experiences, and so on.
Well, I have a very unique academic career because I started as an anthropologist, archaeologist. So I did my degree at University of California, San Diego. And really when I first started as my research, I was very interested in ancient cultures, ancient civilizations. But also I've always had this passion for computer science. So when I was studying at UCSD as an undergraduate, I was taking both computer science and ancient languages. And at a certain point I realized I had to choose between either programming languages or ancient languages. And so I chose ancient languages. So I spent my undergraduate years and into my master's and PhD in archaeology studying ancient languages. So for example, I studied Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Ugaritic, and of course Arabic. And then I also studied the multiple different Greek languages as well. So there's different time periods of Greek dialect. Nice. So I studied all of those, and I kind of put programming on the side until I came back to my PhD, where I dived back into learning lots of programming languages. So I'm unique as an archaeologist, where I started in archaeology and then I moved into computer science. And for my postdoc, I started combining archaeology with what I was learning in 3D reconstruction, in 3D scanning, in visualization. And at the time, I was working with one of the professors that was mentoring me, and we came up with this concept of what we called cyber archaeology.
Okay.
And the whole idea of cyber archaeology is the convergence of archaeology with computer vision, visualization, graphics, to more immersively and collaboratively study the archaeological record. And that led me to working in Jordan for many years. I actually set up what I call the Cyber Archaeology Laboratory in a small village in the Shobak of Jordan, if any of you know where that is. Just about 20 minutes north of Petra. And while I was in Jordan, I was invited out here to Saudi Arabia to give a talk at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology on how I'm merging these two, what seemed at the time disparate fields, computer science with archaeology. And while I was giving the talk, I was invited to come and teach here and actually become a research scientist.
Okay.
So I went back, told my wife, hey, we're going to go into this, we're going to step into the future and go to Saudi Arabia to do this. And she was like, okay. And so last minute we dropped everything, and about 3 months later we were here at KAUST. And within about a month, I met Luca Basson and Mohammed Shalabi. Mohammed Shalabi shared the office next to me, and I was at the time working on all these different techniques of how to better reconstruct archaeological sites. And one of the big problems that you have with archaeological sites is you have so many walls and narrow alleyways and everything, so it's very hard to be able to capture it using laser scanning. And so I came up with an approach called structure from motion or photogrammetry, and I was writing some algorithms to be able to do that. And several of my colleagues said, hey, you need to meet Luca, because Luca has just mounted a camera onto a drone, And at the time, we didn't call them drones. We just called them multi-rotor copters.
Okay.
Drone would just meant, you know, the military drones.
Military like practices.
Yeah. So Luca, I met with Luca and I said, hey, Luca, you know, why don't you fly your multi-rotor copter, your quadcopter over the Kaus Mosque and take a bunch of pictures for me and give me the pictures, and I want to see if I can reconstruct something out of it. So he did that over the weekend, came back, gave me the images, threw them into the software I was developing. At this time, there was no such thing as tools like Agisoft or Pix4D or any of these tools that we have today that almost anybody can use to do reconstruction. Everything you had to do from code. And so I ran it. We had only maybe 300 pictures and it took 2 days to process.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So we've gone a long way. And so anyways, the reconstruction came out and we got this beautiful point cloud of the Kaus Mosque. And so immediately, before Luca saw it, I took it and I ran. In Kaus, we have these huge visualization multi-tile displays. I threw it onto the multi-tile display and Luca came by and he was just blown away by the reconstruction. And while we were showing it, a delegation from Jeddah came by, and they were coming to visit Kaus to see what modern technology, and they saw this 3D reconstruction of the Kaus Mosque, and they were blown away. And they're like, if you could do this for Saudi Arabia, if you could do this for Al Balad, that would be amazing. And they asked, how long did it take you to capture, you know, the Kaus Mosque? So we're like, well, at that time, drones could only fly for 10 minutes. And so we're like, 10 minutes. And they're like, you captured this whole thing in 10 minutes. Can you imagine how long this would take if we use other techniques? And so they're like, this would be amazing. So that's kind of the journey that led from archaeology to my desire to merge archaeology with computer science, to using those techniques and meeting Luca, to creating Falcon Viz, and really the rest is history.
Honestly, that's quite the journey. One thing that I personally, as someone who deals with both the processing and the acquisition side, it's quite amazing how far we've gone.
Yeah.
From just 300 pictures in 2 days to just like tens of thousands of pictures.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's quite the journey. One of the things you touched on is all of the ancient languages that you speak. So you've already told us what they are, but how has learning these languages affected your personal life, like outside of work? Do you think like it added anything to your life outside of the academic field, or?
I think absolutely. Well, one, it made it a lot easier to learn Arabic. So Arabic is a Semitic language, and so it had a lot of similarities, especially to Aramaic and Akkadian. And so it really helped me, of course, to learn Arabic. But I think more, it gave me a new way, a new mind to thinking and being able to parse things apart, right? So studying the languages really helps you with memorization, helps you with being able to decipher things. And really, language is the heart of culture. So if you can really learn a language, you can learn that culture. And so it really helped me and prepared me for coming and living overseas. I've actually lived in Jordan for 8 years before coming to Saudi Arabia, and then 7 years in Saudi Arabia. So 15 years and more, I've been living in the Middle East. And it's learning those languages really prepared me to be able to understand the different cultures that I interacted with, and be able to see the nuances and differences, and also be able to take that and look at the past as well.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to the past in quite a minute. But on the topic of languages, my mother is a linguist, so she's always throughout her like academic career, whenever she has like studies or articles or papers. And one thing that she always says is that language is the container of thought. So that's why it's always interesting to look at different language structures, because sometimes if a word does not exist, or a certain like, you know, form of thought does not exist in that language, then that means that you literally cannot have that thought. So it's always interesting meeting people with different languages, because they have kind of a special outlook on life that not everyone will have. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, just as an example, in the Amazonian area of South America, you have cultures that don't have the word for 2, 3, 5, 6, right? And they just have one and many, right? And it completely changes the way that you interact and you communicate, and it really reflects their culture, where they're not counting every penny to when they trade with their neighbors, right? And
So just the language really defines how you think and how you even conceive of numbers and conceive of counting, right?
That's quite amazing.
Yeah.
You also touched on, being in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. So through, living extensively in culturally diverse areas, what would you say is the key cultural and professional differences that you've noticed? How has this influenced your work?
So, in the Middle East, it's more about relationships and hospitality than what you see in the US.
Okay.
And so what that means is time is less important. Like in the US, time is money, right? And so what I've appreciated and learned from being in the Middle East a lot is that if you spend more time in relationships and build those, it leads to greater outcomes. And unlike in the US, where sometimes because you're constantly trying to meet some deadline or time, you miss out on building something or discovering something deeper.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the big things I learned is that when hospitality can't have a time frame on it, right? And you can't tell your guests, okay, it's been an hour, bye, right? Right? Yeah. In the US, that's kind of normal. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are, of course, different, and learning those things really helped me be able to understand, like how business is done differently here, and how to adjust to those differences. Yeah. So yeah.
All right, that's pretty cool. So also, you've mentioned that you gave a presentation at KAUST. So I'm assuming this is like pre-2015.
Yeah, this was 2012 actually. Okay. That I gave a talk, and the talk was on how to merge these two technologies, computer science with archaeology. Yeah. So
I'm just intrigued by this. What was your perception of Saudi back then?
So you have to imagine that I was in Jordan, in a little village, and it was the winter. And it was snowing in Shobak. So I left this little tiny village and flew here to Jeddah, and then came up to KAUST. Yeah. And KAUST at the time was just emerging, and it was like stepping into the future 50 years. Yeah. And I was actually blown away by how KAUST and the country was starting to embrace all this new technology and think outside the box and say, hey, we can create something with all these resources that we have. Instead of just spending on luxury, let's spend it on investing into the kingdom and creating, the education for the future. Like, we want Saudis to be the ones leading the country, transforming the country, right? And that's what KAUST's vision is a key part of. And now that vision is in many different universities in Saudi Arabia. So I felt like I was stepping into the future, actually coming here. Yeah. And I called my wife in the evening, and I said, you wouldn't believe it. I feel like I've stepped into the future. There's so much technology that's being embraced here, and new things that are happening here in Saudi Arabia and this university. It's way more advanced than even what I was experienced at UCSD. And she's all, that's great. I feel like I've stepped 50 years in the past. She's all, our pipes have frozen from the snow. We're just hovering around a small heater soba. And so that's great, but can you get me out of here?
We're still in the village.
Yeah.
But no, even for like us residents, like I'm a Jeddah native, right? Yeah. But even to us thinking about like that time period, when you hear about KAUST, it was kind of like this fantasy land. It was like this thing that, you know how kids talk about like, other countries. It's like, oh, they have rivers of candy over there. And like, it's like unbelievable. And it's one of those things where it's like, the stigma is not exaggerated, but it comes from a place of truth, because they are doing some amazing things, but the imagination takes it like a little bit further. So no. What would you say were some transformative moments in your career?
Yeah. So I think one of the most transformative moments was when we were awarded the KAUST Seed Fund. So this was the very first time that I ever really got up, and instead of giving a scientific talk, I give a pitch for a company, right?
Yeah.
And that I spent weeks just prepping and learning how to give, an entrepreneurial pitch on Falcon Viz. And so that was a major turning point for me. And I was completely nervous and tried not to show it when I was pitching in front of, the different groups here at KAUST. But after we won that award and we were awarded that, I then basically got thrown into the fire, having to go and pitch all over the country, for Falcon Viz, because Falcon Viz at the time was one of the first Saudi-born and KAUST-born technologically based startup companies. And no one had there were other companies that were doing some technology, but it was mainly ideas borrowed from other places. Falcon Viz was one of the first that really was core Saudi technological advance coming out of KAUST, coming out of the research we were doing here. And so that was a very transformative moment for me, where all of a sudden I went from thinking like a research scientist and archaeologist to thinking like an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And now it's just very natural for me just to get up and talk about both. It's very natural to talk about archaeology and computer science on one side, and at the same time to switch into talking about, financial projections and what we're going to do next, like in our sales process for Falcon Viz. Yep.
And I was going to say, because mashallah, tabarakallah, every time, because you visit us quite often, but every time you're here, you're always talking about all right, this is the next step for Falcon Viz. This is the next thing they want to do. This is where I see the direction of the company going. And as someone who comes from a strictly academic background, it's amazing watching someone with a more experienced academic background juggle both. So how was it, or I don't know how to exactly word this question, but would you recommend for most academic people to have an entrepreneurial kind of look, or is this something that was born out of strict necessity to actually own a business?
Yeah, so when we created Falcon Viz, Luca, Shalby, and I had no business understanding. And we didn't really want to do business or entrepreneurial type thinking. So we were kind of thrown into the fire and forced to do it. And I'm glad that we did, because I feel that I've grown and learned a lot through it. And most of the way the world works, having that perspective really helps. But I definitely recommend for anyone that has an innovative idea that part of the problems in academia is that you have this great idea, you publish the paper, you do the research, and then it just sits and you move on to the next thing. And so it doesn't really impact the economy. It doesn't really impact the place like, for example, Saudi Arabia. You look today at how drones are impacting the world. Just imagine if we just said, oh, that was a great research project, move on to something else. We would have been behind, we would have missed out, or the time from what we're doing now would have been lost. So I think that moving down the entrepreneurial route really forces you to look beyond just how great this is as research, but how it can really impact people's lives, how it can really transform economies, transform the technology in a place.
Yeah. It's also interesting because, I'm not an academic at the PhD level per se, but I've noticed through just the general surface level research that I've done, is that even in academia, it pays to be controversial. There's a lot of research where it almost feels like there is kind of contrived results, because no one wants to hear research. It's like, oh, the thing we already know is actually a matter of fact. So, but most research that actually makes it into the mainstream is the research that is controversial, that is that has outrageous results per se. And I feel like businesses usually aim to go towards the same notion, where it's like, you might be doing something great, but it's something great that it's not making any headlines. So you have to do something even more controversial in order to put your name out there.
Yeah. I would say that it's, one of our views and one of our core values in Falcon Viz is to be innovative. Innovation is risky, right?
Yeah.
So you're pouring money and research into something that may turn out not to see the light of day.
Yeah.
And so you're taking those risks. And we've taken a lot of risks in Falcon Viz to push the envelope, to be on the cutting edge. And some things we've taken risks and we failed in, and then other things we took in risk and we were blown away by. I think that's just part of really the difference between, let's say, a startup technological company and just, another just company that emerges. It's, are you willing to take the risk? Are you willing to advance the technology to transform the economy, to find new niches that have never been filled before with technology in the market?
Speaking of niches and Falcon Viz's role, what would you say is, or what role would you see, let's say, Falcon Viz playing in the kingdom's effort to build the knowledge-based economy?
Yeah, so the 2030 vision is like similar to what you said about Kaus, right? It's like, is that a dream or is that going to actually become reality?
Yeah.
And I actually really do believe that it's possible and we will reach that. And I look at just the transformations that have already happened in a lot of the major cities and all the investment that's being put into these technologies. So I think 2030 vision is achievable. Falcon Viz's role, I think, is very critical to it. Since we formed Falcon Viz, the vision has been, we have the slogan, your world digitized, right? A key part of 2030 vision is digital transformation, right? And so for Falcon Viz, for the last 10 years, we've been that arm of digitizing, right? So digitizing cities, digitizing palaces, digitizing hospitals, digitizing cultural heritage, right? Everything that we can digitize of our world, we've been trying to digitize. I think, though, that I'm starting to realize that Falcon Viz is moving beyond just digitization, though.
Okay.
And so one thing that I've been speaking with my co-founders about is we're not just about digitization. We're actually about digital transformation. How can we go from just digitizing the world to enabling cities like Mecca, cities like Medina, to every day be digitizing stuff? How do we develop products and build capacity within all of our partners and clients to, on a daily basis, be using this digital technology? What are the products that we need to do? What is the capacity building that we need to do? How do we transform? How do we take all this knowledge that we've developed in Falcon Viz and now make it something that's replicated and ubiquitous throughout all of Saudi Arabia? Because the vision of the 2030 vision is to be fully transformed digitally. That can't be done if it's just Falcon Viz doing services for this person or that. It needs to be a full country effort. So now I think the vision of Falcon Viz is moving towards not just us digitizing your world, but you digitizing the world and us coming in to transform the way that you can do it for cultural heritage, the way you can do it for oil and gas, or the way you can do it for construction monitoring or telecom towers or electric power. Can we have, like, my vision is to see Falcon Viz drones on every city block in every major city, right? Doing stuff that's transforming us, like digitizing, documenting, implementing AI to help stuff. Like, there's so many different applications where drones play a critical role in this digital transformation, and we need to move towards enabling that across the kingdom in all these different areas.
All right. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between digitization and digital transformation? Like, what's happening right now that needs to change in order for this to no longer be digitization, but to be digital transformation?
That's a really good question. So what's digitization? That means you're just acquiring digital data. So we can go out, we can scan the Kaus Mosque, and now we have this beautiful point cloud, this 3D model of the mosque. Great. You put it on a hard drive, you deliver it to the client, they can look at it, but what normally happens, they take the 2D plans, they print it out on a piece of paper, and then they use it when they go out to the site and they do everything, right? Yeah. That's digitization, but it's not digital transformation. Digital transformation is that Now you take that 3D model and every day you're using it in the field. You have a digital tablet, you have it on your PC, you're interacting with the models. You're using everything that we've digitized into your daily practices. That's where we need to get to go, to where it's not just about the acquisition of digital data, but the ability to daily analyze, to daily be able to disseminate this digital data to all the stakeholders, to all the decision makers. They have it on hand to make those smart decisions. And then of course you tie all this digital data to AI to make predictions, to make improvements, to make suggestions of how we can improve the world. That's the difference between digitization and digital transformation.
This reminds me of there is I think it was the Construction and Digital Twin Expo in 2023 in Riyadh. It's the one where I presented your FV Falcon Viz Metaverse Lab idea.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman, I forget his name, but there was a gentleman there who said what we see today of like data sharing in general is an equivalent of an exaggerated PDF. And I asked him, I was like, all right, so what do you think is the next step? He said, when the model exists outside of the software that created it. And I feel like that's very similar to the direction that we're going, because you guys also on the metaverse team are always looking at, all right, so we took this laser scan and it's like, rather than have this sit here and collect dust, how can we actually utilize this towards something else that's more immersive and more in depth and so on. Yeah. So no, that's quite an ambitious vision, honestly. In terms of technology in general, with all of these emerging technologies, what would you say is the line between what makes this technology a gimmick and what makes it actually like a technological advancement?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I say it goes back to what we were just discussing earlier, that the second it becomes critical to your daily life is it moved from gimmick to something that's actually impactful, right? So right now with VR, people will put on the headset and it will be, like 5-10 minutes, they'll experience the thing, they'll put down the headset and go on about their day. Yeah. What we want is for it to become critical to everything that you're doing. So as we're developing a lot of VR applications now in the Falcon Viz Metaverse Lab, the whole goal is to develop tools and VR experiences that you would actually find very impactful and useful for your research, right? And so, for example, one that we're doing with Al Balad right now is you can put on the VR headset and you can go through all the structural assessments and get a much more spatial understanding of where they are. But on top of that, you can add additional assessment. You can mark areas that haven't been addressed. You can actually go to the building, you can see those same spots, then you can add that back into the VR experience. But everything is being stored and registered and spatially located as you're continually using the application. So instead of it just being a gimmick of getting just a tour of a building inside Al Balad, it actually becomes a tool for augmenting your ability to understand the structural situation and problems that need to be addressed for a particular building Al Balad. So that's one example of where we're moving from applications that are just about wow factor to applications that are about daily use and improving our use of it. And so that's where we need to move. We need to move from the gimmick type experiences to it needs to be used to really help your daily work.
Yeah, and this is something we face often, I mean, not us specifically, but like in modern day, because you get a lot of these, for example, let's say we get architectural and structural engineers, so rather than, have all of these coordination nightmares of like, book the flights, where are you meeting, where's the owner, it's now a matter of like facilitating the process rather than doing all of this, other stuff that gets you to this point, when it can be as simple as, like you said, I go to the office, this is my work, I just put this on and I go to work, rather than actually having to go through all of these loops. Yeah. So yeah, no, I agree. On a final remark, do you have any advice you would give to young researchers or people who are trying to, whether it's in the field of archaeology or any other field, just aspiring academics?
Yeah. So my advice is don't get locked into thinking that everything is one way for you, but rather be willing to explore and take risks, to try new things, to study areas that no one's studying. Dream big and then pursue those things and not be afraid to fail. I found that in my career, I've gone from archaeologist to computer scientist to a merger of the two, back front to becoming an entrepreneur in the Middle East with a 10-year-old company now that's exploding across the kingdom, to back to UCSD giving lectures on data science. I've got an adventure of going all these different routes. And if I just said, well, I'm only an archaeologist and I only do this and this is what I'm good at, and I don't want to explore other things, I would have never got the adventures that I have. I get to be part of seeing this digital transformation in Saudi Arabia and being a key part of that with Falcon Viz. So that would be my biggest recommendation. Take risk, think outside the box, pursue your dreams that will that maybe no one's thinking of right now.
Honestly, that is great advice. And Dr. Neil, thank you for taking us on this remarkable journey from computational science to anthropology to linguistics. It's been a pleasure having you on, and thank you for coming to our show.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you to our viewers. If you like this, please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for watching.